Just like the Nazis marked the property of Jews, Christian homes in Mosul have been marked with this red symbol. It's the Arabic letter N for Nasara, an early Islamic term for Christians. When ISIS puts it on your home, you either convert to Islam, pay an extortion tax, or face the sword.
The organization Open Doors keeps track of persecuted Christians around the world. And a recent post on their website noted that the population of Syria is 22 million people, with a little over 1 million of those being of the Christian faith. Would that their number was reality. Because at the present time, as Christians are being driven out of Syria and exterminated without prejudice, the very real possibility exists that any moment now, the last Christian will leave Syria. And world leaders, especially those in Europe, all they do is talk. Let's welcome back to the Hardline, fellow at the Philos Project, president of the Iraqi Christian Relief Council, Juliana Taimoorazy, and president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. I want to thank you both for being here on a very tough topic to talk about. Juliana, I'm going to begin with you because, as I noted, it could be any moment now we see the last Syrian in Iraq, the last Syrian perhaps in many Middle Eastern countries, the last Christian, I need to point out, in those countries. How close are we to seeing their extermination? And is it possible that we're looking at something that can never, ever be brought back?
I agree with you, Ed. Prior to 2003 in Iraq, we had 1.6 Assyrian Christians there. Today, we have merely 300,000 left. Let's look at Iran. In the 1980s, we had about 110, 120,000 Assyrian Christians there and Armenians. Today, we have about only 10,000 Assyrian Christians left. The reality is that the Middle East, where the cradle of civilization was for the Assyrian people, and where Christianity first was formed, is being emptied from Christians. And what the consequence will be, it will be a breeding ground for fundamental Muslims whose aim is world domination. We're very close to it. And not only Muslims are doing this to us, extremists, but also good-hearted Christians who are actually extracting Christians from Aleppo and from Erbil in Iraq. They're engaging in breaking down these communities. Although they're being good-hearted, but they're destroying the communities that are called the Assyrian communities.
Dr. Jasser, would you agree with what Juliana just said when she used the phrase breeding ground, that this is not only about people leaving a certain area, but the people who will then take their place, who will then take the place of leadership, and who will then use this as nothing more than that breeding ground to create more extremism?
Absolutely. She's completely correct. And I'll tell you, as a Muslim, with the departure of Christians, just as we saw with the departure of the Jewish population in the last 40 years, is the departure of any chance for pluralism, any chance for a moderate modern society, that with them, as diversity departs, so does, as the society becomes homogenous and monolithic, it'll become draconian, Islamist, and ISIS is not simply a weird anathema. It is a normal byproduct of the Saudi Wahhabi ideology. And the Salafists, which is the fundamentalist ideology, will continue to be able to spread and establish that stronghold of their caliphate. And I'll tell you, though, we have to put this in historical context, too. As she mentioned, the numbers were in Iraq, for example, 2 million in the early 80s Christians, and that during Saddam went down by 60–70%. So these secular dictators are no friends of Christian minorities, just as they've been no friends of the Jewish minority. But now it's put on steroids with ISIS, which really wants to decimate and kill every Christian, while Saddam Hussein, Assad, and other secular dictators really wanted Christians to simply be part of the political party, and if they weren't part of that extremist political party, they would then kill them and torture them also.
Juliana, why is it that the leaders here in America, but more specifically the leaders in Europe, the EU, they refuse to come out and use a very simple word, genocide? That's what this is. It is exactly what we faced once before in World War II. This is the extermination of a people. Why are they so afraid to use that word out loud and scream it about what's happening in the Middle East?
Because they're really afraid of offending the Muslims throughout the world, because this is now perpetrated by Islamist extremism. And I also believe that I mean, look at Armenians. Armenians have been fighting for over 100 years to call it a genocide. And let us not forget that 2/3 of the Assyrian nation was also massacred during that time, during World War I. So if it's taken Armenians 100 years to ask the United States to call it a genocide, and because of our relationship with Turkey, Turkey being an ally of us, we refuse, for political reasons, we refuse to call it what it is. But on that point, Ed, if I may build on that, Pope Francis in Bolivia called this a genocide, and he's coming, and for the first time in Congress, he is going to be speaking to the world, really. And we are hosting a vigil on September 21st at 7 p.m. in Washington, D.C., calling on to the Pope to take a stronger stance. We need a leader who takes a strong stance to call this a genocide.
But let me stop you there for a second, though, Juliana, and that's a wonderful thing to do. And you know that I agree with you. I follow this story, and we've talked many times. It's wonderful that the Pope will speak out about it. But in essence, the Pope can say all he wants. It is still up to the leaders, to the President of the United States, to the leaders of the EU, to the people there, to get some guts and stop being cowards. Don't you think that no matter what the Pope says, and I'll get a quick answer from you and then go to Dr. Jasser, makes no difference what the Pope says. Unless it gets down to these leaders, it's not going to make any difference.
You're correct, and we're really hoping that when something happens in America, it's amplified. So we're hoping that this may touch the hearts and minds of these leaders. But to be honest with you, to be skeptical, I'm just as skeptical as you are. And I just don't see anything of substance taking place today. But we here in the United States can mobilize the next president to do something. And this is the privilege that we have in the United States.
I'm going to agree with you that absolutely the next president. Dr. Jasser, here it is. Hearts and minds of leaders. What is it going to take then to get people, and I'll say this right out loud, stop being cowards. Stop cowering in the face of ISIS and the rest of these extremists and spit the word out right to people that it's genocide and get people to do things. What's it going to take? Who's it going to take to lead this effort?
Ed, you know, it's going to take a recognition and a acknowledgement of those who realize that America and the free world has a role to play and a responsibility because of the freedom that our families came to cherish and our country has had, to stand for those minorities, to stand for freedom, and also, Ed, to recognize that as we see now, hundreds of thousands, millions of Sunnis are coming to Europe, coming to the West. There is an unraveling of the world order that's happening, that the Christian persecution that they've been suffering in the past decades has been the beginning symptom of. And until we fix this, where we find that, you know what, it's not only the evil of ISIS, but the evil of Assad, just as Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi, and the old 20th century dictators, we have to find a third pathway. We have to recognize the prisoners of conscience, the civil society movements, and have a strategy of liberty for that Middle East that is undergoing an Arab awakening. And unless we have a strategy and help them, we're going to let the Russias and the Irans of the world fill that void.
Okay, got 90 seconds left to two of you. I'm going to split that in half. Dr. Jasser, I stay with you first. The Australian government has now launched its first airstrikes against Syria inside, or rather, I should say, against ISIS inside Syria. Isn't this what we need? You don't need just airstrikes. You've got to put boots on the ground. You've got to clean this vermin out. You've got to do something. I realize people are going to be angry at it, but isn't that the only choice we have at this point?
And Ed, I'll have to add to that not only to decimate ISIS, because Assad won't. It's a convenient existence for his regime. We have to also give them a no-fly zone and put Assad accountable and his military for the weapons of mass destruction they've used. So both need to be the enemies and destroyed, Assad and ISIS, because they feed off one another.
30 seconds to you, Juliana. People are going to say we can't keep putting people on the ground. We can't keep sacrificing American lives for this. But isn't it necessary? We've got to bring people in here. We've got to bring the allies in, and you've got to clean this guy out.
Absolutely, I agree with you, and we have to engage countries like Jordan and Egypt in the midst of this. We cannot do this alone. This cannot be looked as another crusade, and this has to come from within the Middle East.
It's unfortunate, but there was a recent article that quoted Joshua Landis, a Syrian expert at the University of Oklahoma, who said that once people see that refugees are going to be taken into the West, they're going to stampede. This problem is going to metastasize. He has talked about more drowned toddlers and the fact that we simply cannot just have compassion for the refugees, but we need to do something on the ground. Juliana Taimoorazy, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, I want to thank you both for being here, a subject that we will always follow up on. Let's make the world aware of what's happening. Thank you so much. March. On deck, the leader of China is coming to America, and no better time for the president to hammer away at a nation that, quite frankly, has had cyber espionage on its mind against America and the world for some time. The fastest 60 minutes of news, The Hardline, continues.